ready to go. We're still setting up one game until Friday. We're going to be having a series of talks, a series of interviews, and a series of other related activities. So if you're interested, tomorrow morning we'll be playtesting and analyzing a series of media literacy games that are being used in classrooms, being used in schools, to talk about things like fact-checking, talking about emotions in news headlines. And so we'll be doing an analysis of that tomorrow morning, followed by a series of live interviews again in the afternoon, followed by a panel. We're doing at 5:30 every single day. And so it's a chance to talk about what's going well and what's going wrong in educational games. And there's a lot of people coming who are not coming from academia, which is really important for this event to be successful. So one of the things that I've noticed as someone who was trained at Teachers College, I have a degree in primary and junior education, so I can teach little 4-year-olds up until 12-year-olds. I'm certified in Ontario, Canada to do so. Still have my certification, haven't used it in years. And now I'm in grad school doing a PhD in communication studies on games being used to talk about disinformation, to put it simply. And so there's a lot of games out there around education games that we're going to be getting into this week. But the point of the event is to not just be focused from an academic lens. So some of the speakers that are going to be coming in and some of the people we'll be talking to today and for the rest of the event week are game devs themselves. They're directors of education for nonprofits like Media.Arts. They are individuals who started their own company that goes into schools and plays board games with kids and then talks about the larger learning objectives that are tied into like commercial board games. There are some scholars coming in who have partnered with people in the industry or who do extensive research around kind of educational games and make their own products. But the idea is that every single panel that we have today is not just a mix, is a mix, or it's not just the same type of person talking about the same kind of themes. We have people from different spaces of the world of education and games coming together to talk about it. And it's really critical that we do that because when I look at the literature that I'm supposed to be reading, that I'm supposed to be writing, that I'm supposed to be referencing from, a lot of it's very academic, but then when you look at some of the work that's being done, a lot of it's being done outside of academia. And there's not a lot of overlap between conversations of what the industry is doing, both from a AAA standpoint, so when you have big companies like EA, or Blizzard, or Riot, or Ubisoft making educational products, but you also have smaller companies like Manaboy and Ululab, who are going to be at this event, and Abora Studios, who are making their own products as well, and they're making very specifically designed educational topics in their games. And so bringing these different voices together is the goal of this event. And under the kind of poking fun at the lack of, or some success that education games have had. So if you're based in Montreal, I urge you to come and play some of the games that are in the space. We have 16 different games set up right here in the Concordia fourth space, which is downtown in the heart of Montreal. It's a beautiful space, and I say that because all the people who run the space are in the room right now, and they're all incredible people. But also, the games here are a mix of games that have been designed by graduates, games that have been designed by some of those companies that I mentioned before, games that are prototypes that are in development, and or games that have run their course and are no longer kind of being run anymore. And why aren't they being run anymore? And so if you are in Montreal, you can come play them. If you're not in Montreal, you can go to badgamearcade.ca, because this is a Canadian event, so .ca, not .com. And you can click on the arcade and you can see all of the games that we are showcasing at the event. Some of them you'll be able to play from the website itself. You can just load up a browser, play it yourself, give it a shot, see how good or bad that game actually is. Other ones you will not be able to play, and I apologize for that. But if you're in town, you can come play them all, because they're all going to be set up here. And so today's panels and today's roundtable is focused on starting the event off with hopefully bringing people to think about education and games a bit differently. So a lot of the time in the work and the literature that I look at when we talk about games and education, a lot of the conversations focus very much on like, how do we teach math in a game? How do we get 2 + 2 into a game and then make it fun for kids? Or how do we gamify some learning lesson to make it fun? And there's a space that I've encountered in my work by looking at some of the more marginalized design spaces where all of a sudden, if you are not kind of a heteronormative body, your game is kind of deemed educational. And so I talked to some friends and some other scholars who are Indigenous game designers, and that doesn't mean that all their projects are Indigenous games, but they get labeled that way sometimes. Because they are an Indigenous dev, all of a sudden what they design becomes an Indigenous game. And that's not true, but that doesn't mean that it's inherently educational. And so today's goal is to kind of challenge and look at what we mean by education and educational games, and having some Indigenous devs come in and talk about what education means for them in their spaces. And so I'm actually really looking forward to this conversation because there's not a lot of written work talking about these things. All of the discourse around Indigenous perspectives on educational games have been things that I've had in passing conversations or heard through kind of the grapevine of discourse and language. And so being able to have some people come into the space, sit down and talk about the work that they're doing, which is incredible, but also talk about how that work is perceived, how they perceive their own work, and how it's being taken up is really interesting to think about. And so for the 3 interviews that we're going to be doing for the podcast in about 10 minutes time, we're still waiting on full confirmation, but about 10 minutes time. The first person we'll be talking to is Will Thompson. And Will Thompson is a pretty well-known Indigenous game dev who's done a lot of work partnering with companies, but also their own projects. One of which is they partnered with a company called Paizo and worked on some tabletop role-playing games, books and documents, which I really look forward to talking to them about because I'm someone who plays a lot of tabletop role-playing games, probably to an unhealthy amount. So we'll talk to Will, and that will be kind of the first chat that we'll have, and Will be joining us in the panel as well this afternoon. But I'm really looking forward to kind of getting to talk with Will about the projects that they're currently working on, what they have worked on, but also how they think about stories in their games and representation and kind of their partnerships. So that will be really interesting. And we're going to follow that up by a conversation with Vanessa Racine, who is a grad student, a master's student, who has a focus on Anishinaabe video games. And I'm going to let her kind of explain that work and where she is and what she's working on, because I mean, that's her forte. And that's not my place to kind of speak to. But I really look forward to kind of hearing about the direction that she's taking. It sounds fascinating, and some of the work that I have seen looks really interesting and promising. And finally, we'll have some individuals here from Revital Software who are going to talk about both their company, their goal, and also some of the games that they've made. Black Fawn is one of the games we have in the space, which is a game about some missing Indigenous women in Canada, which is a topic that if you're unfamiliar with, you can do a quick Google search right now and find some things that I don't think you'll be happy reading all the time. So do warn yourself for that. But it's a very interesting and very powerful game to play through. It's a narrative story of a character that kind of walks you through some subtleties, but also some pretty dark themes that kind of come out of it. And so those will be the 3 panel roundtable conversations we're gonna have in the interviews now, and then those will also be the people who will be on our panels this afternoon. And the panel this afternoon starts at 3:30. We say it will go till 5:30, but that depends on questions from the audience and how the panel is being received. As it is only 3 panelists, so it might only be an hour and a half, but we'll go from there. Well, you know, we have about 10-ish, just under 10 minutes until probably our first panelist gets in here. So if you are still listening to me, I mean, that's impressive. If you aren't listening to me, I don't blame you. And I'm thinking we're going to take a pause, and we'll be back in a few minutes. Sit tight, grab some water, stretch your legs, live life. I'm going to just stand here. Okay. I was checking my email to make sure the panelists are coming. Yeah, I can totally respond to that. Is the mic still muted? I'm good now. Look at that. You would love to hear more about good educational games. What's the biggest challenges are to making a good game? I think it's a really great question, and it's a question that I've been wrestling with as I've been mockingly referring to things as bad educational games, right? I mean, I can't say that and then not have an answer to your question. For me, if I'm getting like technical, I can use the term like game-based learning is a direction that I think is a positive direction. And so you have educational games to kind of break that down for you. You have educational games that are, we want to teach a math concept or we want to teach a historical moment. And so we're going to make a math spreadsheet, and then we're going to add some like gamification things to it. So we're going to have it that whenever a kid answers 2 + 2 = 4, if they answer correctly, the page will sparkle and they get a star, and then maybe they can do something fun. And I would call that a bad game because it's not actually using any of the abilities of a game to do its job. What it's doing is it's just trying to offer reward systems and motivations for a child to answer a question. And when we teach people in life to respond only to external rewards, it doesn't actually lead to long form motivations for engagement. And it also doesn't engage with all the things that a game can do. And so for me, good educational games are games that actively engage with the mechanics of a game system so that it actually makes sense with what it's trying to kind of get across. So to give you some examples for that, one of the games we have in the space that I'm like a huge fan of is called Life on the Edge. It's a free game. You can type it into Google or go to the Steam store. And it's a game about the makeup of a cell and how a cell defends itself from bacteria. And what they did, because I actually remember learning about this in grade 8. And what we did in grade 8 is we had to write a story about a cell and it protecting itself. And that was kind of fun because it was a bit different than the typical thing we would do. And it's been a lesson that stuck with me because I'm 27 now and I'm not in the 8th grade. And so it was still pretty good. So if I were to say make a game about that, I could see someone making a story game about that where like you're playing through a story and you have to choose good or bad. But that's just having a child or a student click its answers in a story. To me, that would still be considered a relatively bad game. There's not a lot of excitement there. So what Life on the Edge does that I really appreciate is they took a genre of game called tower defense games, which are a type of game where you're trying to protect a base from invasion, which is exactly what they're trying to teach about, which is the idea that the makeup of a cell, which is your base, and its invasion from external sources. And so in the game, you build your cell up, you add your mitochondria, you learn about how proteins are constructed, you learn about kind of the need to balance water and resources coming into it. And to do all that, then you also have to build some of the defensive things that a cell has, like cilia to help it move through water, or using mucus to kind of slow down invaders so that they can be dealt with in time. And so it's a game that's not explicitly telling you, it's not being like the game is the teacher, it's not being explicit in what it's telling you, but through its play, everything is implicit in what's happening. So everything you're doing is connected to the learning goals. And so a good game is a game that takes the potential and values of a educational game genre or game genre in general, and then turns it into effective learning moments. And so that's really hard to do, which is why a lot of the time when someone's asked to make an educational game, we don't get products that look like that. Because first off, the world of educational games is kind of fragmented and scattered a little bit, where educational games a lot of the time come out of someone who's really passionate about something they want to teach, and they think that a game might be a cool way, but they actually don't have a lot of the design knowledge, a lot of the background in designing educational games. So they default to simple game structures like quizzes or narrative games. In the research that I've done, which has been looking at games about media literacy, about I could be the number a little bit off. There's a paper about it called, it was a report on the state of fake news games. But it was about 60 to 70% of the titles that I looked at are just story or quiz games, which are just very simple, read through and click, or just click yes or no. And so the challenges of making these really good games that integrate game mechanics into the actual learning goals comes down to, one, do we have teachers who are able to actually implement this effectively? So do we have the resources and tools that if I give them that game, they're actually going to use it? So part of it is a teacher training problem. Of a lot of teachers in Teachers College, I mean, I was in Teachers College 5 years ago, and we didn't talk about video games at all. We had one teacher that mentioned math video games, and they showed me video math games that are similar to the worksheet ones that I talked about before. So there's not a lot of teaching of like, how do we actually implement these games? There's the second problem of budget. To make an educational game, it's not always a profitable endeavor, especially when you could make a commercial game that's probably going to sell much more, because let's be real, when people go home, they're not going to typically boot up an educational game. They're going to boot up a commercial game with their friends and play that. And so an educational game, to be good and really rely on implementing game mechanics, especially one that's a video game that will require more extensive coding and graphics, it has to deal with a budget issue. which is full honesty, that's like a major problem that these individuals have to go through. And then you have this weird tension where sometimes the people who are asking for games, like a school board or a some kind of body that wants this game into their space, aren't actually kind of familiar with the whole principles of how concepts in design can get across to their students. And so they want that quiz game because they can see on paper how the curriculum objective that a teacher's supposed to get across is translated into the game. Because in a quiz game, I can just be like, okay, we're writing a quiz game about COVID vaccines. I mean, that's a game that's out there right now. You can type it in, called Know It or Not, and it's just true or false. You know, there's a question about the COVID vaccine, true or false. And right there we have a game that's teaching you about the myths of the COVID vaccine. But is it really a game? Not really. It's just a quiz, right? It's a reskinned quiz. But if I'm someone who's paying someone to make something interactive that gets my point across, in my mind, if I'm not very familiar with games, that gets it across. I'm happy. It checks off the box. And so there's this real tension in game design that has to balance like appeasing the individuals who are paying for the game, but then also having the time and budget to get it across. And so what makes a good educational game is a really delicate balance between managing the expectations of your project and where it's being used, but then also balancing kind of your ability to use the game affordances that are available to you. And that's why a lot of these game titles struggle, in my opinion, to be good educational games. And I mean, if I were to give you more issues that you kind of see come up is, and this is something that there was a panelist from Common Sense Media, which is a group in the States that reviews games and their educational efficacy for kids in the States. And one of the things they were talking about is, first off, and I feel like anyone who's taught will understand this, but for a lot of people in this world, it's kind of an interesting stat, is that kids respond way more positively to physical games, like to board games, to card games, to movement games in the classroom than they do to video games. Video games have their potential, they have their value, but physical analog, as I would refer to them, games, so non on a computer, have a way higher enthusiasm and engagement rate from children. And as someone who designs, I'm a little biased, I do design board games, I do design analog games. That makes a lot of sense, but if you think about it, if you are trying to explain a concept and you tell a child, okay, sit in front of this computer, hit play, and then read through your quiz or your story and keep going, versus sit down at a table with 3 peers or 2 friends and me, or 2 other classmates, and we're going to play through this game together, there's all of a sudden a very different learning environment that's been constructed. The computer to user relationship of a lot of video games doesn't really give a lot of chance for reflexive thinking in your learning. They can, and teachers can totally take a video game and turn it into like a very conversational lesson, right? You can have a kid playing a game and you can have them pause. You can even do what we're going to do tomorrow, which is I'm going to be live streaming the games up on the screen and then breaking them down as we're playing them. But that doesn't always happen because it's hard to happen. And honestly, teachers, they work a lot and they don't always have the time to implement that into their lessons. And so analog games are really good at getting people into a space and talking about the space. And so if I'm being fully honest, I think really good analog game design or physical game design relies on effectively using that conversation, using the game as a conversation point, as opposed to using the game as a teacher. Where if you are a teacher or you're interested in kind of implementing these games, I really recommend creating designs of games that aren't telling your players how to think, but asking your players questions. So you're creating some kind of back and forth between what the student is doing and what you're trying to teach that isn't telling them the answer, but it's asking them to ask questions about like, well, why did the game have that mechanic? Like, why did I have to roll this die? What does that randomness represent? What is my character? Why does my character get this ability? Or why do they get that ability? Those are really great spaces. And then also if it's like a collaborative game or a competitive game, it's like, well, what did you do and what did your opponent do? And that back and forth opens up a lot of space for conversation that you don't always get in front of a computer. And so the panel tomorrow is actually going to be kind of emphasizing that a bit more, where the panelists are talking about facilitation and implementation of games. And I think it's a really critical piece that part of design when we're talking about education and games comes down to the play, comes down to how it's implemented, how it's used, and how it's surrounded. I feel like that's a very long way to get to your question. I also haven't been informed that our first panelist is here. So I've just been kind of going on it because I am really passionate about this stuff and I love to talk about it. I do know that our first panelist is kind of in crunch time right now, so there's a chance that they are just kind of caught up in the code, as one might say, in design. But if they are a bit late, our next panelist is at 2:25. I don't have confirmation from the fourth space, which is the space where I'm sitting right now, that has this beautiful microphone and this beautiful background. Hello, there's some people here. If that person is in the chat and just I've been talking. But if not, if you do have questions for me about education and games, I'm happy to answer them until our first interviewee kind of arrives.
What's the name, Scott?
Will Thompson. He'll be on the panel this afternoon.
Second panel.
Not they were one of the people that were like, I have confirmed, but you know, sure. But I will promise everyone who is listening and is interested in the rest of the event that the panel is definitely happening, and everyone's confirmed for that multiple times. And the next interviewee just confirmed with me about an hour ago for 2:25 today. So we will get to talk to Vanessa Racine today. I'll give Will just a few more minutes to see if he gets here, but otherwise we might take a pause. But I thank you for being here and tuning in. Education and games, I think, is a space that a lot of people care about, but don't always have the time to think about. And, you know, if you're an educator, I applaud the work that you're doing, and no harm, no shame to you in trying to implement games, because it's not easy. It's not always easy, but the payoff can be great. One of the things I hope to talk about with some of our panelists on Thursday is about kind of why educational games. Because I feel like when we get into an event like this, we get into this space like this, I can talk about, you know, the benefits and good things about games and education, but it's not always the time and place. Games aren't always the be all end all answer to kind of teaching a certain subject. They can help, they can work, they can do some great things, but a game shouldn't always be your answer. And it's important to remind yourself that in whatever you're doing. And like, if you are an educator, it's important to remind yourself of like, I'm trying to teach X concept. What is maybe the best way to get that concept across? Sometimes it's going to be a game. That's where quiz games shine. If you say you're trying to do review and you want to just review what your students learned about X topic, a quiz game in a classroom, that can do the job really well, because I remember doing quiz games as a kid where you got to have your little team and you would name your team and you get your points. And I mean, I don't know if, depending on where you are, you might even get a prize. I remember we got apple slices when I was like in grade 5 and it was amazing. But quiz games have a really good benefit there. I just think the problem when I'm referring to quiz games, or if I'm referring to story games, is that they're kind of overused as kind of an educational solution. And part of it's because they're easy to make. I mean, it's really easy to make a quiz. It's not really easy to make a tower defense game or you know, a tabletop role-playing game. Those are much harder things to do. Yeah, so I think we're gonna put the conversation right now on pause for just a few minutes. Like I said, the next speaker will be coming in about 10 minutes time. If you do have any questions, feel free to ask, but I also encourage you to drink lots of water. I'm gonna do that right now. And stretch your legs, enjoy life. We'll be back in about 10 minutes time. Thanks. So I think people can hear us again. But again, this is a very casual, it's for a podcast that will kind of culminate the event, which will probably come out not right away after due to the fact of editing. For those who are listening live, I would like to welcome Vanessa. Vanessa, I will actually ask you to introduce yourself. That's always the first question that I always ask people to do.
Absolutely. So yeah, hi, my name is Vanessa. I'm Anishinaabe from Beaverhouse First Nation. But I grew up in Southern Ontario in Orangeville, which is close to not really close to, but around Toronto area. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm from. And I finished my bachelor's in linguistics in 2020, around 2020. And then I started my MFA in the Individualized Program at Concordia. So with a specialty in Anishinaabe Video Game Development.
So first off, I also grew up in Southern Ontario,
Nice.
Kitchener-Waterloo area. So I know exactly what
Okay,
you're talking.
awesome. It's
I know
so
exactly what you're
awkward to
talking. I'm sure
say.
someone in the Zoom is like, I don't know where that is.
Yeah.
And that's totally fine. You don't need to. This is our Southern Ontario connection.
Yeah.
But yeah, you just said Anishinaabe video games is kind of like your forte. And so, I mean, as someone who's, looked at some video game genres, that's not always a genre that people like always think about when they think of video game types. So like,
Yeah.
what, can you explain that a little bit more for everyone listening?
Yeah, so I've always been really interested in video games. That's kind of how it's just always been part of my life. So like when I was little, we'd always just be playing video games. I was always the watcher because I was the youngest in my family, so I never actually got to play as much.
Of course, the curse
Yes,
of youth.
the curse of being the youngest. So so it's always been part of my life. And something I noticed in video games was and media in general actually, is I don't really get to see Anishinaabe visibility. So I just don't see anything. Whenever I think of like Indigenous presence in video games, it's always been either like in the past, or it's very generalized, like you don't even know what nation it is. So I never really got to see myself in media and video games. And then I kind of just let that go for a long time. And then when I finished my bac, like I don't really have a background in video game development, but once I finished the bac and like started to really think about what I wanted to do with linguistics and kind of language and Anishinaabemowin, which is the language for Anishinaabe, which is my dialect, I got really interested in how that can be put as how can we make it more visible? Because when you're in language learning, a lot of Western languages have the privilege of having media in the language, whereas Anishinaabe don't really have that opportunity, or it's just not readily available, or it's harder to find in mainstream. So that's kind of where my inspiration came from. And then I got to know Jason Lewis from Concordia, as well as Noelani Arista from McGill University.
Incredible. Anyone who doesn't know these people should just do a quick search for them.
Just name dropping, yeah. So yeah, Jason Lewis is kind of the director of OBX Labs, or Initiative for Indigenous Futures, or AbTeC, Aboriginal Territories in Cyberspace, made with Skawanati, who's the artist in residence at AbTeC, and also the co-director. So yeah, I kind of started working with them a lot, and Jason kind of slowly pushed me into convincing me into actually doing my master's at Concordia, even though I had like no experience. He was like, I was just like, so I don't know how to code, I don't know how to do this. And he's like, yeah, it's fine. So
you don't need to code.
Yeah,
you
exactly.
don't need to code.
So
that's a lie.
I'm like, I don't really know what I'm doing, but whatever, it's fine.
No, for sure, exactly. You get there, right? You learn those skills as you go. But so you're really interested in kind of the linguistic side of Anishinaabe games.
Yeah, in a way. So I did my bac in linguistics. So I have a big theory background in like what makes up languages, how do we learn languages, how can people process them and how they're processed, how do we make sounds. So I've always been interested in those patterns, and something I want to incorporate into my research project, which is building a game in Anishinaabemowin, is to kind of represent regional dialect. So my region, Beaverhouse First Nation, there actually isn't that much out there in terms of academic work on the dialect variation compared to other Anishinaabe regions like Thunder Bay or Minnesota. So we see a lot of the west, like further out west and further south, but not so much the eastern side, as it tends to get, when we think of the east, we tend to think more, especially northeast, it's really like James Bay Cree that gets more research within like academics. So I really wanted to focus on my nation, and to be able to to show how we can present variation and dialect, like that kind of linguistic variation. How can we like present that in a way other people can interact with it? And video games is like such a great way to just explore language without actually kind of tricks you into thinking like this is fun, but you're actually still learning in some ways.
Yeah, I mean, they do have that trick there, but so I guess kind of in that, I have so many questions, but I'm going to kind of stick to the theme of the podcast and the conversation today. It sounds like the game would have a very like specific audience that you're designing it for, or is it more of like a general? So like, what are your goals here when it comes to audience? Is it kind of to bring it back to your own community, to bring others outside of your community to this kind of space? What's your goals there?
Yeah, so I guess my goal is more oriented towards general audiences, including my own nation as well. I mean, when we talk about like language revitalization, something that often gets put aside is language visibility. So, for example, like when you're learning French in Quebec, it's so easy to kind of pick it up quicker because you just see it everywhere. Whereas Indigenous languages, you don't see them everywhere, so it's a lot harder to pick it up because you just don't see it, you don't hear it, you only hear it in certain contexts. So yeah, and I think having a general audience kind of invites people into new stories that maybe they haven't seen before. Because I don't want my game to be, I want everyone to be able to access it and still enjoy it.
Right.
Like no matter like if you're from Beaverhouse First Nation or if you're from like Thunder Bay, or even if you're like not Indigenous at all, like you should be, I think when I make my game, I want it to be so that everyone can experience and take something new from it, no matter what.
I mean, I love that. I mean, I feel like there's a real need based off what you're kind of explaining here for something like that to kind of come out. I feel like you do have a challenge ahead of yourself in kind of producing this. And so are there other games that kind of, I mean, you mentioned there's a little bit of research in other dialects, but are there other games that are kind of doing this in any capacity that you're kind of building from inspiration or growing from?
So in terms of like, the closest game that I've seen, so there's a couple of like Indigenous games that are already out there. For example, AbTeC developed a lot of games like Hey Oh Ow, which is a Hawaiian video game, as well as there's also various like Sami games have been really on the rise. So it's been really interesting to see those games and see how they were able to interact with language. Another like more mainstream wise, I think the one game that comes to mind is Assassin's Creed 3. So that game they actually collaborated with Ganawage.
Right.
So when I was playing that part, entering like the area, it's still based in like the past, which is something I don't really want my game to be focused in. I want it to be based in the present. But when you enter the area in that game, you just like, you hear like songs that were made for the game, you hear the language, you're able to interact with people and like enter these like worlds that most people will only ever see in a textbook. So Assassin's Creed really, because they're such a mainstream game, like it really opened up a lot of opportunity there and kind of showed a lot of mainstream media that this kind of collaboration work can actually be done.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's something I think I really like the way they were able to make that collaboration happen. And I think there's a lot of lessons that can be learned from how we make those games and how we can collaborate. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a promising sign to see the industry kind of take those steps of arguably respect, but also just logic of like, hey, we want to put this in our game. Maybe we should talk with people that would know this information, right? That seems like a logical space to kind of work with. And so I remember playing language games when I was a kid, and it was in Ontario when we were learning French, and we played some French language games that were very like fill in the blank and then get a point. So I'm assuming what you're talking about for your vision for this project, it's not like a very simple like worksheet. It sounds like it's something more immersive. So like what are you picturing in your head when you're talking about a language game here?
When I'm thinking of a language game, I'm just thinking that the game is just in Anishinaabemowin. So obviously there's some challenges with that. So that can go down to like the game mechanics. So like the dialogue, for example, can be in English, but the audio will be in Anishinaabemowin. So you're still hearing it. And then maybe if you're brave enough, you can switch the dialogue into Anishinaabemowin. So kind of, you can play it multiple times and eventually maybe learn how to get to that point of just playing it in Anishinaabemowin. But even just playing it with English text dialogue, for example, and just kind of going through a story that might be familiar to some people and might be completely alien to others. But just being able to immerse yourself in a language that is already doing a lot more than just writing the same verb over and over on a piece of paper.
Well, 'cause that's always my fear,
Yeah.
right? When I'm here like a language game, I'm like, oh no, is it going to be a
Yeah,
quiz? But that's not the
exactly.
vibe that I'm getting
No,
here
not at all. Like in an ideal world, I just want it to be considered like a regular video game. But obviously within the context of like Indigenous languages not having that same kind of accessibility, it's going to, yeah, the languages just like don't have that accessibility. So
Yeah.
being able to fit it as like this game is for everyone and like it can be elevated, it's going to be definitely a challenge. So I want to make sure that even if people want to use it as a learning tool, you can also just play it and have a great time with it.
And that's a point I actually want to hang on to. And I think for anyone who comes to the panel later, or for when you speak on the panel later, that's something that might come up again. And I'm going to preemptively ask you so you can prepare your answer, I guess. But, you know, would you consider what you're doing an educational game or just game making? Like, where is the line for education? Like, where do you see education in this process?
Yeah, I think like that's just been a question I've always been having to ask myself is like, where is that line? Because for me, it's not an educational game, but for someone else, it might be.
Right.
Right. So, and that's something I've always been asking is who determines the genres, and that person who, or like that group that is determining the genre, is it like, are they going to be placing it into an educational genre because it's educational to them?
Right.
Or is it not intended to be an educational game, but still is able to teach new things? So I think my goal is to actually not make an educational game, but by extension, by virtue, like, you know,
it becomes
it's people are just going to learn something new no matter what.
Do you find that this is a problem that's indicative of Indigenous game design specifically, or where like Indigenous devs kind of get defaulted into being seen as making educational products, even if they're not trying to?
Yeah, I think that's just, yeah, I think it's an easy trap to fall into, is to kind of continuously make and be asked to make Indigenous educational games. So I think it's a conversation that definitely needs to be opened up, especially as we're seeing more game development happening within Indigenous communities and First Nations game developers. I think it's just something that needs to be addressed before it kind of snowballs into all Indigenous games being put into a category that doesn't actually quite define these games.
Yeah, I mean, again, I've only had these kind of conversations in brief, but it seems that it's a common thing that keeps occurring. And I feel like, you know, I'm not an Indigenous game maker, but I feel like I would find that really frustrating in my work. And I mean, you're kind of, it sounds like you're at the start, but do you have any like tangible projects that you are working on like right now, or that you have been working on that are related in any of this kind of stuff that you're speaking to?
I'm doing, right now I'm like, for my MFA, I'm still in my coursework, but I'm doing 2 projects this semester. So one is I'm actually making a mini game.
Okay.
So I'm actually making a game on Bitsy.
Oh, amazing.
So I'm really trying to use the constraints that Bitsy has. So for those who don't know, Bitsy is online platform, like not a platform game, but it's an online software that you can use.
Right in the browser, right in the browser.
Yeah, right in the browser. So it's really easy to use, really accessible, but it has a lot of constraints on it. So, and forces you to have a very narrative-driven game and interacting with your environment.
Yeah. You can have a little cute pixel person.
Yeah, exactly. So it's pixel art. You're limited to like 3 colors. So I really wanted to use this game as a kind of prototype for the narrative I want to do in my larger game.
Right.
So yeah, I'm going to be making a Bitsy game, probably just exploring around this weird pixel world. And it's also going to help me because my actual game is going to be 2D pixel art as well.
Cool.
So it's going to be really fun. Yeah.
So are you planning to do the whole game, like narrative, sound, music, like
art, all of it yourself? Are you working with a team? Like, it seems like a big
Yeah,
undertaking.
I mean, I'm hoping I'll get some grants so I can hire some friends along the way. But right now, audio I will not be doing. But I do have Indigenous sound artists who expressed a lot of interest in doing the sound for my game. So that will be thankfully like handled. I am going to be in charge of the art.
Okay.
So the art style is very specific to pixel art because pixel art is actually kind of the art style that beadworkers use to make patterns.
That's really interesting.
Because your beads are so small and tend to be kind of in a square shape, even though they're circular. So ideally, yeah, I'm also a beadworker. I make beadwork and like I'm an artist in that sense. So pixel art actually is not new to me. So yeah, kind of transferring kind of my traditional practice of beadwork and putting it into pixel art feels right to me. So it's just kind of
That's so cool. I
learning how to
never thought
expand
about
it.
it that way, but that's
Yeah.
so cool. Also, since you said you beadwork, those earrings, are they?
These ones are not
They're
mine,
not
but I did
yours?
buy them.
Okay.
From another
They're just
amazing
very
artist.
Cool. No, I mean, that's really cool. And we are kind of running into like the 15 minutes that we're here. So we only have like one or two questions kind of left. But I guess moving forward, right, you're kind of in this space now of pre-design and then design. Do you kind of see a what's next kind of post the game? Like, I mean, no game is the be all end all, right, of the work that one's doing. And so do you kind of have, and I know this might be a dreaded question for you, but do you kind of have like those next steps around kind of where to take it?
Yeah, I think like, when I make this game, I kind of want to make sure that people are able to see it. So I do want to submit it to festivals such as the Imaginative Festival. So it's like North America's largest Indigenous centered festival on both film and new media. So I'm really interested in like being able to submit it there and see the kind of connections I can make at that kind of level with other creators who are in kind of like the same area as me, who are also Indigenous. So yeah, I really want to kind of focus there. But yeah, I'm quite new in it's only my second semester in my master's
I always like to
career,
ask.
so
it's always nice to see what people are
I kind
thinking.
of want to see myself kind of going forward in game development, especially in story. And yeah, I'm really interested in storytelling and how video games are able to create multiple connections. I think it's really important that when you're invested in the game, you're invested in like these characters and whatnot. So
they can really weave like a really interesting kind of relationship between the player and what it's telling,
Exactly.
which is really interesting. And so, I mean, to kind of round off around education again, because that is the focus of the event here. And so, you're going to make a game that's probably about 1 to 2 years out in time of being done. So everyone keep, your notifications on for it. But what can teachers be doing now? Like, I mean, you're kind of realizing there's a gap in what's being done. I know that I'm sure there are educators out there, if I was teaching, I'd be wanting to kind of have some ways to bring these concepts to my students. So like, what can they do right now kind of in that interim time?
Yeah, I think like making projects, I think that really make you engage in language. I think there should be a more focus on second language speakers who are from the ages of 18 to 35. I think there's a big gap in how we learn language. Children are a lot easier to pick up language, and we have, for example, like Kahentawaks Survival School, which is a really immersive program. There's schools like that in Thunder Bay as well for Anishinaabemowin. But there's less focus on young adults, and that's where we see a lot of gaps. Those are where our mothers are. Right. So there comes to a point where your child will actually speak better than you. And so how do you fix that? And a way to do that is language visibility. So being able to create projects, community-led projects that kind of immerse in language, games or being able to like make games and make content that is just like not in English. I think, and directed more towards an audience that is older, because we need to make sure that the children who are learning that language can continue to engage with it.
I think that's really important. I was actually really curious about ages, but I didn't want to keep putting you on the spot
All
with the
good.
specifics because I mean, like, you're still in that thinking phase. But I think the ages are really interesting because, as you mentioned, kids learn language so quickly
Yes.
when they're young. I mean, I still, kick myself for not learning French, and now I'm living in Montreal, and I'm like, I should have done immersion when I was young. But it's really important that you're doing that. It sounds like when people talk education too, all the time they think just schools and classrooms.
Yeah.
But it sounds like the age group that you're working in wouldn't actually be in a school
Most
or
of them-
classroom.
Most of them won't be in that. Yeah. Most of them
So
won't be in the workforce.
you kind of are in this challenge of like, where do you kind of see yourself implementing this, right? Like, are you looking at like libraries? Are you looking at the community centers themselves? Like, where kind of spaces do you see kind of reaching those audiences that you're trying to reach with this?
Yeah, I think obviously it depends on each group. Like I think within Indigenous nations, I think, well, specific to First Nations, just being able to go to like the community centers and have that made available and making sure that, making sure people have accessibility to that. So yeah, like libraries for sure. If there's communities that don't have that much access or don't have as much tech available, just like, yeah, making sure that people are able to have copies and be able to distribute this like more freely. I think it's definitely a challenge of like finding where people will gather.
Yeah.
So that's something that's I'm still thinking about on the horizon.
For sure. I mean, okay, we're also way past our time, so I shouldn't keep asking you questions, but I mean, we'll probably get into some of it in the panel later, and so I can't wait to
Absolutely.
kind of hear more about the work that you're doing and your thoughts here. So thank you for your time.
No worries.
I really, really appreciate it. And for anyone listening, thank you for listening. I look at the computer as if that makes a difference because the camera's actually over there. But thank you so much, Vanessa. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I look forward to chatting with you more later. Of course, yeah, awesome. Okay, so for everyone listening, we're gonna take like a 5-minute break, and then we're gonna have our next kind of interviewee come up. But yeah, come check out the games at the arcade. Thanks for being here.
Yeah,
Awesome.
thank
Okay,
you.
we'll
Thanks
take a
so much.
5-minute break. Go
Chinukwatch.
grab water. Thank you. So I'm back on apparently, which means that the people in the lovely Zoom call can hear us. I have with me now the incredible, and I apologize if I do say your name wrong, but I've been practicing Kahentawaks. Kahentawaks.
Yes.
Kahentawaks. Thank you so much for being here. And just with everyone else who comes here, I ask them to introduce themselves, even though I can say your name for everyone listening. I just, for the recording, it makes it so much better. So can you please introduce yourself to everyone listening?
Definitely. My name's Kahentawaks Tiewishaw, and I'm the artistic director and co-founder of Revital Software, which is a indie game studio, Indigenous owned by myself and my sister, Wanagiragu. Yeah. And we specialize in making Indigenous language learning games. But right now we're focusing specifically on Mohawk because my sister and myself are, in fact, Mohawk.
Well, that makes sense. So why don't you tell me about you just hinted at Revital Software, but like, how did we get to Revital Software existing? What's that origin story? What's the history here?
The origin story is my parents basically being on my case while I was a little kid, being like, oh, if you spent as much time like trying to learn the language as you did playing video games, you'd be fluent by now. And, however many years later, here I am trying to combine the two to a little bit to be like, no, but a bit also because I did find myself wondering when I was younger, like, why don't these games exist already? Because at the time, I was playing games like Interactive Math Journey and Math Rescue. So I was wondering,
Math Blasters?
No,
Never
not
played Math Blasters? Okay,
no.
sorry, continue.
That's fine. But yeah, it seemed like there were games out there meant to teach people something. And I thought, one of the adults will get there. It'll be just a matter of time before somebody makes an Indigenous educational video game. And, I waited, and eventually I wasn't a kid anymore. I was a teenager and it still hadn't happened. So I thought, okay, well, this is just not something that Indigenous people are interested in doing. So I kind of gave up on it for a bit. And then however many years later, I was at Kahentawaks Survival School, where I participated in something called the Skins Workshops. You may or may not have heard of them.
I'm not familiar. And Vanessa also mentioned the Survival School. And
yeah.
And I wasn't sure if this was like, it sounds like it's a bigger deal than I was maybe aware of. So could you maybe explain?
So Kahentawaks Survival School is where I went to high school for like grade 9 up to 11. I graduated from there. And I think the school itself was created kind of in response to one of the language laws being passed in Quebec. I think it was the first one, Bill 101, if I'm not mixing the numbers up. But a bunch of Billings students, that's another school in the South Shore, basically the Indigenous students, I think, walked out and were like, well, if you guys are going to be like that, we'll make our own school. So, yeah.
Gosh, they'll show them.
Yeah, exactly. Where we could teach like our own culture, our own language with our own curriculum.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so that's where I went to the second half, my senior school half of high school.
That's really
So while I was in school there, one of the courses I was taking was a graphic arts class, and my teacher, Oizogulahash, love her, beautiful, amazing human being.
Let's go.
Yeah.
I don't know anything about them, but they sound great.
She's amazing. She's like my second mom. But yeah, she invited Jason Edward Lewis and Skawanadi, who you might have heard of.
We just talked about both of them briefly in the last interview. Yeah.
Yeah. So they run this organization called Aboriginal Territories in Cyberspace, and now the Initiative for Indigenous Futures. And one of the things that they do is they offer workshops to Indigenous youth to teach them how to transmediate local stories, myths, legends, even histories or original works into video games. So they did that in my 10th grade and 11th grade graphic arts class, and it kind of introduced me to the world of like Indigenous people can make video games, not just consume them. And I was like, hell yeah. So from there on out, I was like, this is what I have to do. And
that's amazing.
Yeah. So I graduated from Concordia however many years later in 2020 with a Bachelor of Fine Arts specialization in Computation Arts. So now, I founded Revital Software, and we're doing all these cool things with video games.
That's so cool. I love how you have now become the adult that you were hoping someone to become.
Yeah.
You have ended there and become there. And so you're saying you're making all these games. Is there one game in particular that you're kind of very fond of, or that your heart bleeds a little bit for?
Right now it has to be Black Fawn, because I had the idea for Black Fawn, I think back in 2019, maybe 2018, actually as part of a skins workshop. And I thought, this character, Black Fawn, would make a great, main character for a video game. And I've been kind of workshopping it ever since, even though it was quite a while ago. It's a long, slow labor of love that kind of is evolving as I'm evolving as a person. So who knows when it'll be done? But
is it going to be one of those forever projects that you'll always
might be?
I mean, that is the beauty and curse of video games, is you can forever change them and you can forever alter them. Now, for anyone listening who might not be familiar with Black Fawn, I mean, you can Google it and you can go to the Bad Game Arcade website to read a little bit about it. But perhaps you could give them a little bit more context as to what the game's about, your connection to it, and what you're kind of trying to get at with it.
Yeah, so Black Fawn is a game about an Indigenous girl who's going to school, like college basically, in the city, away from her home community, and she's trying to reconnect with her best friend who has had some type of traumatic thing happen to her in a semester gone by, and she's trying to help heal. She wants to heal herself, help her friend heal, and it's just really complicated because all of this is happening in the context of her like trying to keep up with her schoolwork and like having to learn French while not speaking her own Indigenous language. And like her friend has come back to school and she feels a bit awkward about it, like how do I interact with her now that this horrible thing has happened to her? And kind of, I don't know, just navigating that space of like, how do I not make it about me as the person who's not undergone some sort of colonial violence? So yeah.
I mean, that sounds like a really like intense game to be working on.
Yeah, it is intense because, I'm not a survivor of colonial violence myself. I don't personally know somebody who's been touched by the missing and murdered Indigenous women crisis, but like it's everywhere. It's like permeated my whole existence pretty much because like I went to school in Kanehsatake, as I said, and I actually don't live in Kanehsatake at the time. I was living with my parents in Kanehsatake, which is like an hour north of.
That's a commute. That's a commute to school every morning.
5:30 a.m. every day on the bus.
Gotta love it. Gotta love it.
Yeah. So on the drive in to school every day, we would cross the Mercier, obviously. And for a really long time, there was this billboard right next to the bridge, like not advertising, but a big missing persons board for Tiffany Morrison, who's like a missing Indigenous woman from that community. So like it's almost inescapable. And it's kind of like this thing, it's a theme in my life actually, where I can connect big systemic issues to like mundane things that happen in my life, where I'm like, oh, this is that, and that's connected to that. So it's kind of draining sometimes, but that's life.
I mean, yeah,
What-
so we
what
can end
can
with
I
that.
do?
That's life, you know. That's a nice note to end. But you're not wrong at all in what you're getting at here. And so I guess, would you consider Black Fawn an educational game?
So I think in some sense, yes, because if you're not Indigenous, you're not a woman, you might not be aware of, you know, the ongoing crisis that's related to that. So it provides a bit of perspective about what it's like to be somebody from that community who's like affected by these issues, or at least hearing about them all of the time. So yeah, it's educational in the sense where you can kind of embody somebody that's from the
Right.
community it's affecting and get a greater sense of empathy of like why these things are so important to know about and to talk about.
Yeah, and so I mean, I wouldn't consider it like a traditional educational game, right? Like when
Mhm.
people think of them, I don't think it's the first game that you think about. And given the content matter that you're talking about, is it a game that you think requires, you know, more extensive facilitation or implementation kind of
Oh yeah.
expectations when you're putting it into a classroom?
Yeah, so if you ever put a game like Black Fawn into a classroom, you couldn't just like assign students, players to be like, oh yeah, play through this and write an assignment about it. Like you have to have some type of facilitator, teacher, mentor, or like community member in the classroom with them to be able to answer some of the more difficult questions as somebody, you know, that's directly connected to some of those issues. Otherwise, it could just be like, I could see some potentially troubling things coming from, you know, an unchecked playthrough. Maybe the worst, I don't know, the best thing I could hope for would be, I don't even know. you just need to have somebody there to have a good conversation with about
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, I mean, do you have like resources or kind of things that come with the game when you hope to release it full?
Yeah, that is something I should definitely do. Right now, we're still in like the very early stages. I can't even
Yeah.
imagine when it's going to be done. But right now, like the first chapter is out. I have a pretty good idea of where I want it to go.
Okay.
It's just making it while also trying to make all of these other traditionally educational games that
Yeah.
I've got going on
So,
the side.
Okay, for a very quick question before I jump on to what you just said, how many chapters are you hoping for?
I think maybe 20 at the
Oh,
most.
at the
Yeah.
most. I thought you were like 4.
No.
Oh my, okay, that's like,
Yeah,
this
I
is gonna be.
actually- yeah, I have a lot of the writing done already. It's just a question of making sure everything makes sense, because you know, when you have branching narratives, things can get a bit messy, and it's pretty
Yeah.
much just me and my programmer working on it, so it's like a wonder team of 2. So that affects
A wonder team of 2 it is though.
Yeah.
Okay, I mean, I can't wait to kind of see what because I've played through now the first chapter as it's in the space, and 20, I mean, that's okay. I
Yeah.
can't wait. I'm kind of now like excited, but I'm not gonna, you know, no pressure on getting that out the door sooner than later.
Mhm.
But you said you're also working on like what you would consider more traditional educational games. So
Yeah.
what is that? Like, what are you working on? What's
So right
hot
now,
deets?
we're actually, the company, Revital Software, is in the process of applying to many different grants and even looking for like potential corporate and government sponsors,
Very cool.
because we want to make a library of Mohawk language learning games that's available free to play on our website, because like in my opinion, and you know, the opinion of my comrades in the company, you shouldn't have to pay for a language that's yours, first of all, that was
Yeah.
like forcibly taken from you. Like, it seems
Yeah.
ridiculous to me that Indigenous students attending college and university or what have you have to pay to register for those courses at all, like when it's our languages.
No, when you put it that way, it sounds kind of ridiculous.
Yeah, like, bro.
Well, come on, man. What's
Yeah.
going on with that? I mean,
Yeah.
I think that's actually a real challenge though that educational games have, is that, I mean, for myself too, like I made a board game around conspiracy theory online, and like a big thing for me was that game was free, that like there was no, I'm not making money off of this, that people can just download it and play it. But
Yeah.
that's like people, like I had people message me like, well, you should like charge for this. And I was like, no, the whole point is to have people teach things and use it to learn. And so, I mean, how do you kind of balance that like desire to, you know, pay people a living wage and also like, you know, support the people who support you in that project, but then also still, you know, have it be there and available for everyone? Like, has that been a real challenge for you guys?
It's a challenge because you do want to pay people like competitive wages. Like I'm definitely of the opinion, especially when I'm like contracting out work to community members, whether it's like first language speakers for translations or like potential musicians or artists, what have you. I always want to pay them as if they're experts, even if they're just starting out in the field because of the circumstances we're living in right now, but also because it shows that you're willing to invest literally in like their future and show them like your art and your practice, like your skills are worth something.
Yeah. I should say the music in Black Fawn, all of us in the space when we were listening to it, it's very good, very well done. So
Thank you
like
so
10 out of 10 to that. But I do think like that is a challenge that educational games kind of have. And so maybe what's it like you said all the games that you're working on are language games. Is that
The majority of them. I think Black Fawn is actually the first game I've made that isn't language oriented.
okay?
Yeah.
And so when you say you're working on a lot of different language games, are they all like the same type of game but being reskinned, or are they all like very different types of games?
So far they've been very different types of games. Maybe one or two will have kind of similar themes of a previous game that I've made because we've made, I think, a total of 7 language learning games so far, and 6 of them are currently being used in a Mohawk immersion school in their
That's
classrooms.
so cool.
Yeah,
Congratulations.
thank you. I was really excited about that. It felt like a big step. Yeah, so those are all like very traditional language learning games where it's kind of like they have a bit of an element of focusing on traditional knowledge, storytelling, but yeah, the vast majority of them can be like considered traditional educational games.
For you, what's like the biggest challenge that you're facing in kind of making these educational games?
So right now, the biggest challenge for me personally is the fact that I'm like not a Mohawk speaker and I'm making Mohawk language learning games. And this is like despite the fact that I went to a Mohawk immersion school, elementary, and like a school like Ganawageh Survival. Because I think I overheard Vanessa saying earlier that like there's not a lot of language visibility, and that's definitely the case for me. Like even as a child, when I was attending immersion school, I would go home at the end of the day, and even though I had heard Mohawk and been speaking Mohawk at school with my friends and with my teachers, I would come home and my parents don't speak. I'm watching like anime in English or Japanese on TV. I'm playing video games in English. I'm like living in a province where everyone's speaking French. So,
You're in a very like language focused province too.
Yeah. So it's that's definitely my biggest challenge. Like I'm trying to see this as like my opportunity to learn by making these games, and like I'm hoping to eventually get into an adult immersion program. Like there's one that's offered in my home community of Kanehsatake that I think I'm on the wait list for right now, but I'm also interested.
A wait list? I mean, that's promising to hear in one capacity.
Yeah, it is promising. I hope I get in.
Fingers crossed for you. But I mean, you hit a really like critical point when you're talking about like the process of making is learning. And I think that's something that I hope comes out of like the week that we have ahead of us in this kind of event, where people, always end up on like the final product of like my game is an educational tool, but like they always forget that like the making of that game, you learn a ton about what you're trying to teach in the way. And so like what for you has been like the most like humbling or like really interesting things that you've been learning in that process?
Oh my gosh. So it's really the hardest thing is realizing how much of Mohawk I've forgotten over, my many years of now being educated primarily in English and a little bit of French,
Yeah.
Because like I remember being able to have like pretty good beginner level fluency conversations with my teachers and classmates as a child, but now it's almost like completely gone. And that's just like the reality of the world I'm living in, because I don't have a whole lot of opportunity to practice with my family members, and my siblings are kind of in the same boat as me, where once upon a time we knew all of this vocabulary, but now it's like out the door because we don't have a lot of opportunity to practice.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think you raise a really important point. And so, I mean, that is our time because we have to prep for the panel that's coming up in 20 minutes, which you're going to be on alongside Vanessa, Will Thompson, and chaired by Maze Longboat, who I think walked in during our conversation today. So it's set to be good for anyone who is listening right now. You should stick around. I think it's on a different Zoom link though, so you're gonna have to go find that yourself. But thank you for being here.
Thank you for
I
having me.
appreciate your time and your energy, and I wish you the best in the 20 or 19 more chapters to go of
Yeah.
Black Fawn.
Yeah.
So all the best. Thank you.
Thank you.
For everyone listening, thanks for being here. Thanks for listening. We're going to take a break until 3:30 or probably 3:25-ish, 3:30, 3:25. So like I say every time, grab some water, stretch your legs. We'll see you soon. Thanks so much, everyone. Gosh, you guys are so cool. My gosh, all of you are so cool.